you are your own authority. I am a really big believer in agency, aligning with yourself and yourself first. And it's interesting, as an astrologer, people come to me looking for answers a lot, or wanting me to tell them what to do. And they're often surprised that I turn it back on them, because what I really want is for people to know themselves. And I believe people have those answers within them.
Yeah, it's everything. Knowing yourself is knowing God. It is knowing the universe. People do look at it as, well, astrology is telling me who I am. Well, nobody can tell you who you are. That's for you to decide. Not everyone's there yet. Not everyone's looked at themselves.
Very true.
Not everyone's looked in the mirror. They're like watching the news, and I'm like, you want the news, dude? Look in the mirror. Look at your freaking chart. Look at the transit. That's what's going on right now. When you look up at the stars, you're actually looking at a mirror of what's inside your body. Let the planets be your guide in your own body and inner wisdom as we discuss body astrology, a cosmic guide to health, healing, and harnessing the power of the planets. Before we dive in, I sincerely want to thank you for having the bravery to face your shit and heal yourself by listening to this show. Because we're talking about very real shit on this show, its exposure and its reach are being censored and limited. So thank you for liking this video, sharing it, and subscribing on YouTube and Spotify to my channel to help this information reach the people who need to hear it most. Facing your shit and healing yourself is more than just this podcast. It is a movement. You can join this movement with a one-off donation or become a member for as low as $5 a month, receive exclusive art, be featured on the show, submit questions for guests, and more. So who am I, and why did I decide to create this show? Well, after unraveling all of the medical and pharmaceutical lies I had been told about my endometriosis, I was able to educate myself, and I was able to heal myself after 17 years of debilitating pain. My experience inspired me to actually live my art. So I created an ongoing art series about it called Every Phase, where I create artwork that illustrates how I healed myself living by the phases of the female hormonal cycle. Just look for the Every Phase vlog episodes on the podcast as I recreate select pieces of the series as an animated mini-series. The artwork shows what's happening in the brain and the body during each phase and reveals how to biohack and leverage this energy in your life. I am actually living the art, so it's about way more than just healing. The writing and the art discuss freedom, truth, our current financial and healthcare system slavery, and the way out of it. Learn more by subscribing on my website at meredithochoa.com. So all of that to say, even though I was lied to for years by doctors promoting big pharma, I was able to find experts and modalities that helped me achieve what I thought was impossible. This show introduces those people and practices to you. Today we are chatting with author, astrologer, non-diet nutritionist, certified eating counselor, and certified strength and conditioning specialist, Claire Gallagher. Claire has been a professional astrologer for over 9 years with a focus on presence instead of predictions. She uses astrology to help people feel better today instead of future tripping about tomorrow. Whether she's doing a reading, moving with the moon, or teaching planetary journaling, Claire's mission is to help others hear and follow their inner wisdom. She's the author of Body Astrology and the host of the podcast Third House Gossip. You can find her at www.astrologywithclaire.com. Right here. God, I love
Awesome.
this book. Yeah.
They did a great job. They designed it really well.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And that just further complements just the extraordinary information in here. Look at that. Hold on, I gotta shit. It's look at that. So yeah, I gotta do a shout out because I'm an artist and I truly appreciate it's like the paper, the embossing and like the foil. I love it.
I love it too.
Yeah,
I was
it's
really
awesome.
pleased when I opened the box of Body Astrologies for the first time. It was really fun, a very special thing, and
Yeah.
I couldn't have been happier with how it turned out. So,
Yeah, most people, it's kind of like an oversight, or I think they don't really think about how visual people are and how many senses are involved in just taking in information, especially on a spiritual level. And it's like such a missed opportunity. That's such a huge part of the show and like what we're even talking about. It's such a
yeah.
missed opportunity for healing, for a deeper understanding and a deeper connection to what you're even looking at and feeling and discussing
Mhm.
when it's not
Yeah.
just words. Mhm.
Yeah, I think the design was really great in breaking up the information because otherwise the book feels kind of like a textbook. It's not a cover to cover read, that's for sure. It's
Mhm.
definitely a take it piece by piece, more of a reference book. So I really love the way the color and just the typesetting broke it up in a way that felt more approachable and more digestible because otherwise it could be a little bit overwhelming.
Yes. Oh, it could have easily gone there too. But
Yeah.
fucking astrology, I've been obsessed with astrology since I've been a child. I was just naturally drawn to it. And even for me, it's really hard. It's overwhelming. It can be, at least. It's one of those things that there's so many layers and levels to talk about something on, from like the bigger picture, like chart level down all the way to the degree, and that has a meaning in the second and all of that. So for those of you who don't know, I would love for you to just share a little bit about who you are and how you came to face your own shit with astrology. How's it helped you?
Yeah, well, I've been an astrologer for almost 10 years now, and it has been the premier tool in helping me love myself more and to understand myself more. So I think the main thing or the main way astrology has helped me is to help me develop self compassion because it allows you to see yourself with such clarity and precision. And when you can see yourself with clarity, you can offer yourself what you need to thrive and you can make better decisions, more authentic choices, and also treat yourself with more kindness. And that to me is astrology's greatest gift. I don't care if people predict the future. I like that's not my jam. I really use astrology to be with how we are now and to love that. So,
Yeah, clarity is everything. If you're not clear about who you are and the choices in anything in life, how can you even make a choice, really, if you don't even know and are clear on what you're choosing, who you are, all of that? I've learned that very recently. It's come up. We make it so complex, but it's at the end of the day, are we even clear on like
mhm.
why the hell we're doing this?
Yeah, and astrology can help you understand the different parts of yourself and what those different parts need. So for me, it's really a guidance tool, a clarity tool, and it helps. We hear about alignment a lot in astrology, but I feel like it's a tool that helps you align with yourself instead of aligning with something outside of you. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I remember we chatted a little bit about that, and I totally understand that kind of like alignment weirdness conversation, because we were talking about how like really can't be out of alignment, which I totally get. And then I kind of think of it too as like just being in integrity with your values and what you're valuing at the time, what your boundaries are. And those change as we learn more about ourselves and more about people and the world around us. Our values change.
yeah.
So,
And that change is reflected in your chart as well because your
mm,
astrology chart may never change. You may always have the same birth chart, but the sky is constantly changing. And the changing sky interacts with your birth chart in new ways, creating challenges and opportunities and change within yourself and outside of yourself. So I love astrology because it's descriptive of the now and how we evolve over time.
And it really addresses time, kind of like how you were saying, as it's not, we are experiencing it as linear in this kind of three-dimensional construct, but it actually isn't linear. All time is happening at the same time. And that was one of the things that first really struck me about astrology is this really circular version of time and like more holistic rather than we're just kind of on this like everyday. We are experiencing it. It's both, right? It's both. We're experiencing it as linear, but in reality, it's like all of it's happening right now. All of it's happening at
Mhm.
the same time, just like different levels. So really interesting. And we could spend hours talking about that as well. But I know your book, which I was hyping on earlier, it has been, I just want to go there again because it's just been such a critical resource for me. And it holds so much wisdom, especially when I found your book. I was like, and I had healed myself of endometriosis and done a lot of heavy lifting. And I found your book after, and healing, like I say, it's a journey. It's not a destination. You're never going to
Right.
get it all done. Like you're at a different level. And at that level, you have options now that you couldn't have even conceived of when you were sick or when you were unhealed or when you were just like hadn't integrated that part of you yet. So I'd love for you to just share because when I found medical astrology, I was like, holy shit, like maybe I'll just quit being a photographer. That if you're an astrologer. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit about just medical astrology, how people can start utilizing this modality, not only for the connection to the cosmos, but the connection to their bodies and their health.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Medical astrology is massive. It's
Mhm.
a huge field. And so the way I would break it down is we typically think of astrology as more psychological or emotional. It describes our personality, etc. But medical astrology uses the same chart to describe your body and your body systems and the health and stamina and susceptibility of those body parts and systems. So instead of looking at the chart as a map of your personality, it is looking at the chart as a map of your vitality. And so, very basically, the zodiac signs like Aries through Pisces represent different parts of the body. And this is a simplification, but the planets tend to represent forces or actions within those body parts and systems. So, a medical astrologer looks at the birth chart and is able to see strengths and weaknesses in the body based on where those planets are placed in the chart and if they are in a happy or sad position. And so from there, if they have other credentials to do so, can make recommendations in terms of lifestyle choices that a client may want to consider in order to bolster or buffer their chart.
Wow. Okay. So, for instance, so when I learned all that, I remember seeing, okay, and I knew this obviously a little bit with the sixth house being the house of health, at least historically, and like your day to day work, right?
Mhm.
In Western astrology. And that's actually also something we could talk about if it even differs. Western, the medical astrology, Western, Vedic, I'm sure it does. But at least in Western astrology, I knew, okay, sixth house, the house of health. And I had a stellium in my sixth house. But then really diving into that in your book and looking at, okay, I have a stellium there. And then I have, which a stellium is, I believe, 3 or 4 planetary bodies.
Yeah, I just think of it as a cluster of planets in one location. It's
There
typically
we go.
three or more. Yeah.
There we go. And then also my 10th house, which is a house of career. And so it's very appropriate that we're having this conversation on a podcast and that my healing ended up being a large portion of what I do in my work and having this message out to the world, going through that process. let's say someone has some kind of chronic disease, autoimmune, doesn't have to be endometriosis, but just like anything, what are some ways or some things they can look for in their chart to further clarify what is going on and discover like remedies through that? What would you suggest for someone kind of just starting looking at this?
Yeah. First, I would reiterate that it's really an overwhelming field. And so starting with one thing is my recommendation. And that one thing, okay, I have two things. One thing to start with is your natal moon. So when we think of
Mm,
astrology, we typically think of your sun sign. What's your sign? Are you a Capricorn? Are you an Aries? Whatever. But in medical astrology, we are looking at the body, not the psyche or the personality. And in ancient astrology, which is what I practice, the body is represented by the moon. The moon is a very physical planet, it's a very animal planet, and it represents our physical form.
mm,
So if you want to just dive in and start with something accurate, I would start first with knowing what your natal moon sign is, and then grabbing a copy of Body Astrology and looking up that sign and reading about the body areas that are associated with that sign. And that'll give you a really good idea in terms of, from a day to day wellness routine perspective, what to nourish and focus your time on, because those are the body areas that are probably going to be the most, well, it's like a doorway into your highest health, if you will. Those are the things that are going to need the most attention. It doesn't necessarily mean they're in ill health or good health. That's a totally different conversation, but it is a
yeah.
part of your body that has a lot of energy running through it. And the
Right.
second place to start, and this is a little bit more advanced, but if you have any astrology nerds out there, the
Hmm.
second planet in your chart that really represents your body is your chart ruler. So, what's your rising sign?
So Leo, so the sun would
Yeah,
chart
so
rule
you
it.
would look at the sun. Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you for playing along. You would look at the sun and where that is located and those associated body areas for secondary information.
Got it. You sent an amazing email about you don't have to just understand your chart. Like she's saying, there's so many different levels to discuss astrology on. You don't have to just know your big three. There's other ways to understand your chart, which is one of the reasons I love your work. Just the different
Mhm.
like approaches to this really big, beautiful mandala that is us because we hold all of the signs within us. We hold all of it. It's just like in varying degrees, if you will.
Yeah.
But one of the things that also struck me totally the moon conversation. I've my moon in Scorpio. I'm Aquarius
Mhm.
sun. So my big three. So traditionally people say, okay, no, your big three. So for those of you that don't know, your sun and then your moon and your rising determined by the time and location. And that's something you can look up. Just there's tons of calculators out there.
Astro.com is always a tried
Astro.
and true
Yeah.
resource.
There
Yeah,
you go.
it's a great resource. It's very robust for free. So, highly
Yeah.
recommend.
Yes. Yes. And when I got further into astrology years ago and started looking at my moon and my rising, and because my rising is the sun, so Leo is my rising, because my rising is the sun, the transits of wherever the sun is. So the sun, being all the sun signs, is like what is affecting me currently. So it's kind of another way you can look at it in this cyclical, seasonal way of like,
Yeah.
where is that planet now? And because that really determines a lot of our day to day health. It's not just, okay, we are this way, and that's like a period at the end of the sentence. No, it's a whole story and seasonally changes, as you
Mhm.
know.
Mhm. Yeah. And being sun ruled and the sun moving through a zodiac sign every 30 days makes you
Mhm.
extremely seasonal in so many ways. So that's such a good example. And for other people, you figure out what your chart ruler is by knowing your rising sign and then knowing what planet rules that sign. And that's something you can easily Google. But for example, I'm a Sagittarius rising, so I'm ruled by the planet Jupiter. And so I'm more affected by where Jupiter is and if it's going direct or if it's retrograde and what sign it's in and what aspects it's making. So you can get really granular if you want to.
You totally can. God, Jupiter. Love Jupiter. I feel like it's considered lucky ducky. One of the best. Wherever Jupiter is, know where Jupiter is in your chart, because if you have goals about money and different areas being blessed, you want to look at where Jupiter is, because that's going to bring you blessings. At least I feel. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Jupiter is definitely a planet that represents where we want more in life, where we can access growth, where we can access improvement and encouragement, and also luck. So, wherever Jupiter is in your chart can represent some natural gifts and just a little bit of the universe acting in your favor without you having to do too much heavy lifting.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Jupiter for me, guys, is on my algal. What you whispering? Don't know. Algal is the demon star. So like it's like unbridled rage. The story and history of Algal is really actually interesting if you like to know. From my understanding, I believe Algal was formed because of Medusa was raped in a church, and then this star. That's at least how I understand Algal from the stories that I've read. And then Algal was formed basically from that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. So it's unbridled rage, but I associate it definitely with like feminine rage. But
Mm.
it is interesting, the things that have really pissed me off, like even starting this show, writing my book, I've always been inspired by things that I first get really mad about. And then that becomes a catalyst for something really positive. So
Yeah.
it's weird. So if you
That's
have
a great interpretation. That's a great interpretation. Yeah.
yeah. I'm just saying, if you have it somewhere weird and like unfavorable, it's not, just look deeper, because it's okay. Anger and things like that don't bring a lot of blessings to a lot of people. But in my experience, it has. So there's
Mhm.
always something unique to be found in
Yeah.
everything, really. Yeah.
And I love your perspective because a lot of people could have seen that and been like, oh my God, my life is doomed. But the way you saw it was really holistic and much more accurate and much more compassionate. So that's really inspiring to me, your natural astrological perspective.
Totally. And another one of the really powerful aspects of body astrology, medical astrology, is the connection with our fitness routine or movement as well, and
Mm,
the lunar cycle. Those two things have definitely helped me just navigate a lot of pushing against something when it's not necessary. So I feel like this inherently ties obviously to the female hormonal cycle. Can you share just a little bit about some of the different phases of the moon and then the movements associated with each?
So, first, I'll back up and reiterate that the moon doesn't just represent the physical body, but also its capacity to do and to act. So, the theory would be that the more light the moon is reflecting, the more vital we feel, the more energy we have, the more capacity we have to do outward facing, high energy, high output tasks. And the darker the moon is, with the less light it has, the less willing or desiring we are to do those very high output, high energy, outward facing tasks. It's more an inward, slower, lower energy type of time. And so instead of dividing the lunar cycle into 4 phases or 8 phases, I think the easiest thing to do or is to divide it into light phases and dark phases. So this is even different from waxing and waning. This is just focusing on if the moon is light and bright or if it's dark. So the dark phases are the new moon and the last quarter moon as the moon is dying, and the bright phases are the first quarter moon as the moon is gaining size and the full moon. And I'm
Mhm.
putting a lot of other phases within those, but in terms of movement, it's not necessarily about what movement you do, it's more about how you do it and how you approach it. So when the moon is dark, let's say when it's brand new and when it's dying, when it's darkening and moving towards the end of its cycle, it's a time for us more so to work on recovery. So whether
Mm.
that's active recovery, taking a gentle walk, doing yoga, maybe some Pilates, doing restorative movement, all of those things are wonderful for darker moon phases. And similarly, if you're an athlete or you have something that you focus on that's like maybe you're a cyclist and that's what you love to do, dark moon might be lower intensity but longer rides, for example.
Hmm.
So something that isn't going to push you at your threshold, but something that's easily maintained, maintenance work, if you will, for lack of better term. And then when the moon is bright and light, this is a really wonderful time to play with challenge, to flirt with challenge a little bit, to add on to our routines, to play with intervals, to play with high intensity, to play with higher breath rate and higher heart rate if you choose. The full moon, especially, is the culmination, and that's a great time to do something that might be a little bit out of your normal comfort zone in terms of movement. What I love about moving with the moon cycle is that there's a time for everything. There's a time for
Hmm.
deep rest, and there's a time for challenge if you want. Yeah. So that's the basics.
Yeah, and it's so necessary to at least acknowledge the cyclical. Doesn't matter if you're a female or male,
Mhm.
everyone is cyclical just by nature of being on this planet. Uh, it affects each of us. Not every day is the same. By experiencing seasons, there's seasons of our body. And I love that
Yeah.
you said this whole thing about it's not doing this movement on this moon, like on the new moon, do X, Y, Z. It's how you do it because not all the time, like, your cycle is gonna match up with what is going on with the moon, especially for me.
Right. Oh, yeah. And I think that's a really good pinging back to the alignment piece.
Mm.
That's where astrology is a tool, not a rule. That's a rhyme I love to say to my clients.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is personally, I would say align with yourself first. So align with your body first, and astrology would be next in line, right? If you want to use astrology at all. So yeah, if your body doesn't sync up or bleed with the lunar cycle, and many of us don't, and that's normal and okay, align with yourself first, and you can use the same wisdom no matter where you are in your cycle in with the lunar phases. Yeah. Same concept, just different timing.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. My cycle is one of those that's, like, the opposite.
Mhm.
Usually it changes, obviously, throughout the year, but usually I'll be in my menstrual phase on the full moon.
Yeah.
Or so instead of this quiet time, it's okay, the most powerful. But for me, honestly, when you look at it too deeper, it makes sense because that's like the time I get the most powerful messages.
Mm.
Psychically, it's a very powerful time. So it just doesn't always necessarily translate physically. And of course,
Mhm.
my body is like recovering, but I'll do yin yoga or, like you
Yeah.
said, just like a longer maybe practice, but it's, like, super nourishing. So,
Yeah.
it's, like, that balance of strength, but also being super grounded at the same time when you have, like, opposites like that, which is really cool that you can discover that through the chart.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance that astrology can hold, and that's one great
Totally.
example. Yeah.
Totally. Well, speaking of challenges, what would you say are some challenges people may face when they start working with these cycles? Obviously, okay, not everything's going to line up, but when they start looking into their chart, their body astrology, their own unique makeup, what the different signs represent as far as areas of the body, what is your advice as for when people come up to these challenges that they may face?
Yeah, I think that I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but that's okay. I think the biggest challenge that people face with body astrology and astrology in general is overwhelm. and
Yeah.
misinformation. That's
There you
another
go.
one.
Yeah.
So again, I think it's best to start small and accurate. And so if we want to be accurate with this vein of astrology, we want to start with the planets that represent your physical body. So that's going to be your moon and your chart ruler. And just start observing those planets out in the wild. So what I mean by that is before I was astrologer many years ago, the way I started doing this was by keeping a moon journal, a moon symptom journal. And it's really easy. All you got to do is at the top of the page, write what phase the moon is in, which you can get
Okay.
from a weather app. You don't need anything fancy. And what day of your menstrual cycle you're on if you're a menstruating person. And then write down anything noticeable, specifically energy, mood, any symptoms that you're tracking. And from there, I was able to draw patterns. And that's how the whole lunar cycle fitness thing evolved, was from my symptom journal and from observing that also in my clients. So I would start with that,
Mhm.
especially if you're living with an illness or a condition. That can be a really eye-opening thing to do. And the second would be to buddy up to your chart ruler, get to know who it is, and then
Yeah.
figure out, where is that planet in the sky right now? And what
Yeah.
can I learn from that?
Awesome. You're not necessarily doing the same thing, but like looking maybe at the same placements, but just in a different way.
Just keep it simple. You have plenty of time to add on the bells and whistles. Like,
Yeah. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them.
there are. Yes.
So if you could have a giant, tremendous billboard anywhere with anything on it, getting a message out to millions or billions of people, what would it say and why?
It would say something that my mentor always says over me, kind of like a blessing. And that is, you are your own authority.
Mm.
I am a really big believer in agency, personal authority, aligning with yourself and yourself first.
Mhm.
And it's interesting, as an astrologer, people come to me looking for answers a lot, or wanting me to
Mm.
tell them what to do. And they're often surprised that I turn it back on them, because what I really want is for people to know themselves. And I believe people have those answers within them. So it would say, you are your own authority, or some version of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's everything. Knowing
Mhm.
yourself is knowing God. It is knowing the universe. It is knowing everything. And knowing yourself, it's like from the inside out. That's how we treat everything. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because people do look at it as, well, astrology is telling me who I am. Well, nobody can tell you who you are. That's for you to decide. And then it goes into the whole free will and fate conversation. And it's both. It's not just one thing. It's like this and consciousness. Of course, we have free will. And then there are events that it feels like destiny or that are fated. But the way that
Yeah.
we come about those and the way that we approach those and the journey towards those can be so different and actually change like our entire perception of it itself. So
Mhm.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I'm such an advocate for that as well. And people are like, then why do you like astrology if you're like nobody can tell you who you are? And I'm like, because that's the whole point. It's no one telling me. It's like me incarnating here and learning more about myself, and then me making
Mhm.
decisions based on my own experiences and what I've discovered.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we kind of have astrology backwards. So astrology doesn't tell you who you are. You inform or define astrology. So what does
Yeah.
it mean to be a Scorpio moon? Well, because you live it. And yeah, so I'm not a big fan of cookie cutter descriptions of, this is who you are personality wise. I'm more of a fan of astrological journaling, because that actually
Mhm.
brings up who you are and how it relates to astrology, if you will. And that's a whole another outfit. But yeah, I'm not really an astrologer that's you are this. And if you hear an astrologer say you are this way, that's kind of a red flag. And I would look elsewhere, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. Great point. Because not everyone really understands. Not everyone's there yet. Not everyone's looked at themselves.
Very
Understand.
true.
Not everyone's looked in the mirror. They're like watching the news. And I'm like, you want the news, dude? Look in the mirror. Look in the mirror. Look at your freaking chart. Look at the transit. That's what's going on right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And astrology describes what's happening. So it's a descriptor, it's not a creator. It doesn't create the conditions. At least that's my opinion. And there are differing
Yeah.
opinions. Astrology is describing what's happening right now. So all you got to do is observe, and that's telling you what the astrology means.
Awesome. Well, it's now the finale, my most favorite time of the show, the biohacking with art finale question. Are you ready?
I'm so ready. Yes, I think.
Hell yeah, you are. You got freaking Jupiter as your chart ruler. Let me tell you, so ready.
Born ready.
So ready. Born ready. Totally. If you had to describe your unique astrological perspective with any art medium, how would you make it? And what would you choose?
Okay. Full disclosure, there is not an artistic bone in my but
That's
what I
okay.
really yeah. So it's I don't even know the names of the mediums, but what I know what I like and what I'm inspired by when I see art out in the world is mixed medium collages. Love
Mm.
those. I love a big mix up of different materials. And so if I were an artist, that's what I would do. And it would express in some way, again, to align with yourself first and then
Yeah.
to look outward. Yeah. Mhm.
Wow. Love that. And mixed media, of course. I'm a mixed media artist. Love mixed media. I like it.
Right.
The hell yeah. Well, because there's so many different mediums. It's like, why be limited to just one, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to put it all on there and then it becomes something else on its own. So I love that interpretation. It's so fitting too with astrology, with what you do, with body astrology specifically, because there's so many moving parts and they all come together and form one piece, right? Yeah.
I like that interpretation. Yes. Exactly.
Hell yeah. Well, it's been so real chatting with you today in this galactic conversation. Tell us where people can find you, connect with you, learn more about your work. We'll have this stuff in the show notes, but where can they connect with you?
Yeah, the best way to connect with me is on my website, which is astrologywithclaire.com, and that's Claire. And I'm actually not on the socials. That's part of my chart, and I am aligning with that. So if you want to keep in contact with me, the best thing to do is to get on my email list, which you can do at astrologywithclaire.com/email. Oh, and I have
Amazing.
a podcast too, which you can listen
Mhm.
to. It's called Third House Gossip. And so if you want to get astrology insight, that's a fun way to do it.
Definitely check it out. And I so wish that social media, I'm Aquarius sun, so like freaking social media, but there are days when I'm just like, why? So yeah, so learn more about your chart and it can definitely inform some career
Yeah,
decisions
for
for
sure.
sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I hope everyone is able to take away something from this absolutely tremendous conversation we've had today with Claire to help them go out, face their shit, therefore healing themselves. And remember, as always, the truth will set you free. We will see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.
If you liked this episode or you think this show would be useful for someone else, the best way you can show your support is to share it on your social media outlets with family and friends, or subscribe with the link below to receive exclusive perks. And if you're feeling really generous, please leave a review on podchaser.com, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts, and pick up a signed copy of my book about how I healed myself from endometriosis on my Instagram at Meredith W. Ochoa. Thank you so much for listening and for having the bravery to face your shit and heal yourself.